Thanks, Jim. Okay, I wanted to say something. I should have started off with this too. I don't know if this is, a thing. This is a disclaimer. When we go through chapter 19 tonight, this is a chapter that has to do with sexual abuse. And I can imagine a situation where if that is something that would be traumatic to you to talk about these things, or if somebody's watching online, I don't know if you need to step outside for that. It's just kind of a heads up on what's coming. It's an ugly picture of something that happens in humanity. And so it might just be worth thinking about in the next couple of minutes. I'll throw this up here. We are on our last class of Judges. The very bottom here, 19, 20, and 21 matches with chapter 1 and the way that the book started. And I thought that this little sentence was as good of a description of what we're going to do tonight as anything. Today, the story should be used as an example to talk about the chaos that may result when people act instinctually and apart from God. The scene of Judges 19 is the place to which sin's trajectory leads. It is dark, cold, painful, and terrifying. It resembles hell itself, a place defined by divine absence and self-presence. So we are rightly at the bottom of the toilet bowl in the book of Judges. Last week we talked about a complete rejection of God and God's ways, and today is going to be the consequences of that kind of living. Like everything that we've talked about with the downward spiral in Judges, tonight is the consequence of that. And it is something to be feared, I think, and something to pay attention to. Anything you want to say about the text before we get started? What I would like to do is a hopefully pretty quick overview of the story. So let's read verses 1 through 3. Chapter 19, verses 1 through 3. In those days when there was no king in Israel, that's how the text starts and ends. There's no king in Israel. A certain Levite, who are the Levites again? Remind us from last time. What was their function and their role? They're priest. A priest. They served as priests, but they also cared for God's things. And God said, among the tribes of Israel, the tribe of Levi, the family of Levi, you don't get a portion of the land because God said, I am your portion. They're God's special servants. And so you would think, reading this, that, hey, this is a Levite. We should be reading about somebody who's got his stuff together, who's at least somewhat spiritual, should be, compared to other people in the book. There was a certain Levite who was sojourning in the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, who took to himself a concubine from Bethlehem in Judah. And his concubine was unfaithful to him, and she went away from him to her father's house at Bethlehem in Judah, and she was there for some 4 months. Then her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and to bring her back. He had with him his servant and a couple donkeys, and she brought him into her father's house. And when the girl's father saw him, he came with joy to meet him. So I hope that you're just immediately a little bit shook. A Levite was traveling, and this story is about a Levite and his concubine. What? I mean, we kind of expect that from people of the world, or people who don't care about God's ways, but not a Levite. Let me ask you a question. In verse 2, it says his concubine was unfaithful to him. Does anybody have, Mike, do you have your NET on you tonight? No. Dave, do you have one? Yeah. What does yours say in verse 2? My ESV says his concubine was unfaithful to him. 19:2.
She got angry at him and went home to her father's house.
Angry at him. She was unfaithful to him and she was angry at him are different. Becky gets angry at me sometimes. Unfaithful to me is different from angry. And so there's I just got a little note in my text here. If you have a study Bible, maybe your study Bible has a note about this. There's just a little textual issue here where I think the way that the ESV and the New American Standard reads, his concubine was unfaithful to him and went away to her father's house in Bethlehem, kind of makes you think she did something wrong and he put her out and she left and went. There's a total opposite way of looking at this, which this other way I think fits with this Levite's character way more than the first one, and that is to say that she was angry at him, and we don't know why, but she was angry enough to leave. And that kind of makes a little bit more sense out of verse 3. Her husband arose and went after her to speak kindly to her and to bring her back. And so, you maybe just stick a little note there that says there's something textually going on with this, and maybe she was not unfaithful to him in the way that we think, but that he was the problem. At least it's something to consider. I don't know what the right answer is. Textually, I don't know what the right answer is, and I don't think that anybody can give you a right answer. I think you got to figure it out from the context. Anything on that? What's happening? Big picture here. Verses 10 through 15. I'm just going to read tonight because I don't want to ask you to have to read. If you really want to read, you can raise your hand and that's fine, but I'll just plan on reading this section anyway. The man would not spend the night. He leaves with his concubine. They're passing back on his way home. The man would not spend the night. He rose up and departed and arrived opposite Gibeah, that is Jerusalem. And he had with him a couple saddled donkeys, and his concubine was with him. When they were near Gibeah, the day was nearly over, and the servant said to his master, "Come now, let us turn aside to this city of the Jebusites and spend the night in it." And his master, the Levite, said to him, "We will not turn into the city of foreigners who do not belong to the people of Israel. We will pass on to Gibeah." You've got to see this. This is highlighted in my Bible. You've got to see what's going on here. The Levite and his concubine and his servant are passing through, and the sun's going down, and the servant says, "Hey, look, there's a city, let's stay there." And the Levite says, "Psh, foreigners live there. We're not going into their city. Let's keep on going a little further into Gibeah. That's a town of our people. We'll stay with our people." You really have to see that with this story. Verse 13, he said to the young man, "Come, let us draw near to one of the places and spend the night at Gibeah or at Ramah." So they passed on and they went their way. And the sun went down on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. And they turned aside there to go in and spend the night at Gibeah. And he went in and sat down in the open square of the city, for no one took them into his house to spend the night. Somebody shows up in a town as a visitor, goes to the open square, and nobody takes them in. Is there another story in the Bible that sounds like that?
Jesus.
What?
Jesus.
No. Well, I mean, maybe the opposite of what I'm thinking of. It sounds like Sodom. Thank you for shouting. Did you say it quietly the first time? I didn't hear it. Oh. Sodom. Sounds like Sodom. This sounds like, listen, see how many parallels in verse 16 sound like Sodom to you. "Behold, an old man was coming from his work in the field at evening. The man was from the hill country of Ephraim, and he was sojourning in Gibeah." So this guy who finds the Levite in Gibeah, he's not a resident of Gibeah. He's just somebody who's sojourning. Nobody of the town of Gibeah takes this Levite in. And I think part of the text, this is what a lot of the commentaries say on this too. Like, I mean, you'd kind of think a Levite. Let's take the Levite in. Let's see. The men of the place were Benjaminites, and he lifted up his eyes, and he saw the traveler in the open square of the city. And the old man said, "Where are you going, and where do you come from?" And he said to him, "We're passing from Bethlehem in Judah to the remote parts of the hill country of Ephraim, from which I come. I went to Bethlehem in Judah, and I am going to the house of the Lord." That's probably worth noticing. He's from the hill country of Ephraim, and he says, a Levite, that I'm going to the house of the Lord. Shiloh was where the tabernacle was, the house of the Lord in the hill country of Ephraim. So it's, I think, probably more than likely that he's going to the home where the tabernacle is. Which I think makes it even worse. "No one has taken me into his house. We have straw and feed for our donkeys, with bread and wine for me and your male servant, the young man, with your servants. There's no lack of anything." And the old man said, "Peace be to you. I will care for you for all your wants. Only do not spend the night in the square." So he brought him into the house, gave donkeys to feed, and they washed their feet and ate and drank. Anything up to this point? Observations or comments or questions? Yes, Ryan?
The law is just filled with all these different rules and regulations, even for taking care of people who aren't of the sons of Israel in your town. And this guy is a son of Israel and is a Levite nonetheless. And it's like he's totally neglected. No one cares.
Yeah. So not only is it a part of the law, but culturally, hospitality like this is just expected. And the fact that this hospitality to let a stranger stay out in the town square, for us is kind of like, well, I mean, he's a stranger. He's not, you know. And if you're a Middle Eastern person reading this story in the hospitality culture, this is appalling to you. Even worse. Yeah, that's a good point, Ryan. 22. "As they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, worthless fellows." Have you seen that yet in Judges? Where'd you see that? Abimelech went and surrounded himself with worthless fellows. Jephthah, remember Jephthah? Not role models. The city is filled with worthless fellows, these kind of people. They surrounded the house, beating on the door, and they said to the old man, the master of the house, "Bring out the man who came into your house, that we may know him." And the man, the master of the house, went out to them and said to them, "No, my brothers, do not act so wickedly." That is almost a direct quote from this story of Sodom. "No, my brothers, do not act so wickedly." One easy thing to remember, to stick in your brain: Genesis 19, Sodom; Judges 19, Gibeah. 19. Good to remember. "No, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Since this man has come into my house, do not do this vile thing. Behold, here are my virgin daughter and his concubine. Let me bring them out now. Violate them, and do with them what seems good to you. But against this man, do not do this outrageous thing." But the men would not listen to them. So the man seized his concubine. Is that the Levite? We can say for certain. What is your opinion? It sounds like the Levite, doesn't it? "I know how to fix this, take her." So the man seized his concubine and made her go out to them. And they knew her and abused her all night until the morning. And as the dawn began to break, they let her go. And as morning appeared, the woman came and fell down at the door of the man's house where her master was until it was light. And her master rose in the morning, and when he opened the doors of the house and went out to go his way, behold, there was his concubine lying at the door of the house, with her hands on the threshold. He said to her, "Get up, let us be going." But there was no answer. Then he put her on the donkey, and the man rose and went on his way to his home, probably the tabernacle or near the tabernacle. And what does he do when he gets to the tabernacle? When he entered his house, he took a knife, and taking hold of his concubine, he divided her limb by limb into 12 pieces, and sent her throughout all the territory of Israel. And all who saw it said, "Such a thing has never happened or been seen from the day that the people of Israel came up out of the land of Egypt until this day. Consider it, take counsel, and speak." All right. It's chapter 19. What do you think? Jared?
One of those things when you tell people it's a Bible story, they can't even believe it. You're like, that's not in there.
Yeah.
But it is, obviously, but one thing that I've always kind of thought about is, why is it better to say, hey, here are these two girls that you can do whatever you want with, versus, no, don't do this terrible thing with these guys. And I'm sure there's an explanation to that, but it's always been kind of an interesting subject for conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't really feel right. You might remember that the last time we read a story like this, God rained fire from heaven and destroyed the whole place. This is not the kind of behavior that is acceptable among God's people. And let me remind you that the Levites said, we're not going to stay in the city with pagans. We're going to go to our people. He's among Israelites where this happens. And so by painting a town in Israel with the exact same paintbrush as Sodom, who was destroyed by God, what's the author of Judges doing for us here? I mean, what's the message? What's the big picture?
God's land is corrupt.
Yeah, that's for sure. You're just as good. I mean, you're just as good. You're just as bad as Sodom. Why would God keep that around? He didn't keep Sodom around. What do you think is worse? The people of the city, I see you, Dave, the people of the city and what they did, I mean, the homosexuality initially, the rape of the concubine, those are very top of the list of bad things. The thing that turns my stomach over with this story, though, is that this girl almost made it home, and the Levite, God's servant, walked out the door and said, "Oh, there you are. Get up. Let's go." That part turns my stomach over. Dave, what do you have on this?
Just thinking about it, there's so much wrong in it. It's just compounded. This is a horror story
Yeah.
that happened. I mean, this is something that for me, I place in the realm of the true crime that you see on television, with the people saying, we thought this happened at other places, not here, not to us. And I think about, the problem of evil that our brotherhood as in humanity has, as if there is a good and true God, why is there evil? And to this, I see, speaking as mankind, because we persist for it. We just persist towards evil, and we push it and push it and push it as far as we can take it, until it gets to a point where God says, all right, I'm going to flood the world and
Yeah.
start over, or I'm going to burn it all the Sodom and Gomorrah and start over, or I'm going to whatever he's going to do after this with these people to get them to wake up, or to just destroy them.
Yeah. I like especially the way you started your comment. There is so much wrong with this story. I mean, there's nothing redeeming about any of this. Mark, did you have something?
She was angry with her husband and went back home to her father for 4 months. He comes and gets her, reunites with her, his knight in shining armor, right? Gonna take her back home. They get to a place and he's partying with, offering her up to these men to keep them away from himself. And in the morning he walks out. I I take it in verse 28, she's already dead when she's laying there on the threshold. That's why she doesn't answer him. So he just throws her on his donkey and takes her back to his house. That's pretty sick.
Yeah, the whole thing. Jonathan?
Well, I just didn't know if is there anything to be said about purity and the fact that he just cuts her up? I mean, cuts her in pieces, that seems a little.
So I think this story, I think it's a historical story. I think that about all of the Bible stories that are told. But this story is a compilation of everything we've read about for the last 3 months in the book of Judges. I think there are elements of all the judges and all of the stories that we've seen up to this point. And so with that in mind, do you remember when we talked about Ehud, the ideal judge, a picture of an ideal judge, who both sacrificed himself and said to his companions, you guys go on, I'm going back, I've got this thing to do, put himself on the line in order to serve God, and not only sacrificed himself, but the language describing Eglon and what he did to Eglon is that he made a sacrifice of this person. This Levite is the opposite. He sacrificed somebody else, not himself, and then he took this person back to the tabernacle in Shiloh where sacrifices were offered and cut her up as you would a cow or a sheep to make a sacrifice. And so it's a picture of somebody not willing to sacrifice himself, sacrifices somebody else for his own self-interest. And when you talk about sacrificing her, like to the very end of the line at the tabernacle, cut her up like a sacrifice. So that's what I think's going on here. And then this is just like a little extra thing. Stick this one in your head. Do you know, Dave, do you know anybody else from Bethlehem in Judah who was sacrificed by somebody in the place where God is by the leaders of God's people? Is this girl a foreshadow in some kind of way of Jesus? I don't know. That's just worth thinking. Anyway, that's the story of what happened. That's what led to what's coming. Anything else on that? Adam?
Just real quick, I was just struck by the phrasing of them saying, don't act so wickedly. And that's like the only standard that's left is like, just whatever seems repulsive or not to me. And it didn't bother these people, and so they went ahead. And that's the whole, everyone's doing what's right in their own eyes. God called his people to be pure and holy. That's so far out the window. It's just like, don't go all the way to this extreme. And they say, no, we don't care.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me make sure I haven't missed anything. Okay, so we'll summarize a lot of this next section here, the next 2 chapters. This is the result. He sends this woman's body parts around, and he says, chapter 20 and verse 1, then all the people of Israel came out from Dan to Beersheba. Picture a map. Dan, you know where Dan is because we talked about it last time. The very northernmost city in Israel, all the way down to Beersheba, the very southernmost city of Israel in Judah. It says, from Dan to Beersheba is a phrase in the Bible that describes all Israel. This is the first time it's used in the Bible. You know what's interesting about this story? Remember how many times we've talked about Israel cooperating and working together? Here is a picture of Israel cooperating and working together more than any other time in the book of Judges. We're going to see cooperation right now. All the people of Israel came out from Dan to Beersheba, including the land of Gilead, and the congregation assembled as one man to the Lord at Mizpah. This is good. We want them to work together. And the chiefs of all the people, all the tribes, presented themselves in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 men on foot that drew the sword. Now the people of Benjamin heard that the people of Israel had gone up to Mizpah. And the people of Israel said, tell us, how did this evil happen? And the Levite says in verse 7, this is what happens. He says, behold, you people of Israel, all of you, give your advice and counsel here. What do you all think we should do about this? Probably not the right question to ask. Maybe a better question would be, what does God want us to do? What should we've been doing up to this whole point? I don't know. And so they go out. There's a civil war. I've underlined the numbers because everybody loses. In this story, that's the moral of the story. Everybody loses. It's kind of like when my kids fight. We have a rule and a saying in my house. Whenever there's a fight, I don't care who did wrong, everybody loses. I'm taking your stuff away and nobody gets it. That's the rule in our house. This is what's happening with Israel. Verse 15. The people of Benjamin mustered out of their cities on that day 26,000 men who drew the sword, besides the inhabitants of Gibeah who mustered 700 chosen men. 26,700 people of Benjamin. You need to see that in your Bible. You need to have that number in front of you. 17, the men of Israel, apart from Benjamin, mustered 400,000 men who drew the sword. So 400,000 against 26,700. In verse 21, the people of Benjamin came out of Gibeah and destroyed on that day 22,000 men of the Israelites. There's 400,000 against 26,000, and the 26,000 kill 22,000. And Judah cries, and they say, oh no, what should we do? In verse 25, Benjamin went against them at Gibeah a second day and destroyed 18,000 of them. What's 22,000 plus 18,000? What? 40. Okay, see, that's why you have that advanced degree in business to know those things. That's a lot of God's people to die. That's a lot of people to die. And you're the good guys in this story. You're Israel going to fight against Benjamin, the bad guys. Tens of thousands of people die. In verse 28, Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, ministered before those days, saying, shall we go out once more in battle against our brothers, the people of Benjamin, or shall we cease? This is a civil war. In verse 35, the Lord defeated Benjamin before Israel, and the people of Israel destroyed 25,100. How many Benjaminites started? 26,700? What's 26,700 minus 25,100? What? Loud? Somebody say it loud for me. 1,600. 1,600? Is it 600? 1,600? 1,600? That's what I'm talking about. 1,600? That's not very many men for an entire tribe to be left. There must be another 1,000 that die, because by 47, 600 men turned and fled toward the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon and remained at the rock of Rimmon for 4 months. 600 men left in the tribe of Benjamin. This is not only the story of a Levite who sacrifices his concubine and chops her all to pieces and gets rid of her. It's the story of Israel who sacrifices one of their own brothers, Benjamin, an entire tribe, and chops him up and obliterates them to 600 men. This story is the reason why I've been emphasizing in every single story, look, cooperation, and then you get to the story of Gideon and things kind of take a bad turn and Israel kind of turns on each other, and then it gets worse and worse and worse. It's all leading to this. There's not only a lack of cooperation, there's actual infighting and destruction of Israel at this point. And Israel was, anything you want to say about the war? The war, Dave?
23 says, and the Lord said, go up against them. So I think it's proper to keep a perspective that this is what God wanted to count.
Uh-huh.
And they are requiring of the Lord if this is the right thing to do. And he said, yes, it is.
And all the people of Israel died as a part of that too. Remember how God fixed the problem early in the book? He raised up a judge. You know how God fixes this problem when all Israel's broken? He says, I just got to get rid of you. This is Sodom.
What about the people of Benjamin not giving out to the people of Gibeah?
That's gross too. I mean, that would have been ideal. That would have been our ideal solution. For the people of Benjamin to say to their brothers, you know what you did was wrong. But instead they said, no, he's my brother, I'm standing with him. The level of brokenness here is just, it's appalling. So, then Israel gets upset about it. Oh no, we took a vow. None of us who fought against Benjamin can give his daughter to a man of Benjamin, and now because we've made this rash vow, that ought to sound familiar, you make a rash vow that ends in the destruction of your family, Jephthah. Now that we've made this rash vow, there's not going to be any more Benjamin. And so the same idiotic minds who got themselves into this mess in the first place come up with an idiotic solution to the problem. Chapter 21 and verses 8 through 12. If you've never paid any attention to this story, I got to read this. This is incredible. They said, what one is there of the tribes of Israel that did not come up to the Lord at Mizpah? Who among us at Israel didn't go and fight against Benjamin? Because we all said we can't give our daughters. But who didn't come with us to fight and make that promise? Behold, no one had come up from the camp of Jabesh Gilead to the assembly. 9. When the people had mustered, behold, not one of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead was there. So the congregation sent 12,000 of their bravest men there and commanded them, go and strike the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword. Israelites, who at this point haven't done anything. They're just Israelites. So these geniuses say, oh no, we have nearly destroyed Benjamin. I got an idea. Let's go kill all the people of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword. Also the women and the ones. This is what we'll do. Every male and every woman that has lain with a male you shall devote to destruction. And they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins who had not known a man by lying with him. And they brought them to the camp at Shiloh, where the tabernacle is. They brought them to the camp at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. That's a description that says, this is no longer the promised land that's inhabited by God's people. This is the land of Canaan. I just cannot. This is every mom in this room has said to their kid, somebody hits your kid and your kid balls up their fists and they go after him. They say, whoa, this is not what you do. When somebody hits you, you don't hit them back. And it's not just a mom thing. It's a pretty solid Bible thing. We don't repay evil with evil. These people, it shows you, I think, the depth of their depravity and how far away they are from God. Oh no, we have almost destroyed Benjamin. Let's go destroy Jabesh Gilead and take 400 of their virgins to give to the people of Benjamin so Benjamin isn't destroyed. I mean, besides the level of wrong, the level of stupid is just incredible that somebody could think on this level. What do you think about that one? Comments about this story? Yeah, Mark?
I'd be disappointed that they didn't have this kind of drive and ambition when they were supposed to drive the inhabitants out of the land to start with.
Remember how we started the book? Yes. Remember how we started the book? This is the list that we made on our very first class with Judah. We read the first 18 verses, and I said in that class, what's right here? And I had a few of these things on the list, but you all, I wrote them all down, what you said. I went back and listened to the video and wrote them down. This is the list that we all came up with in that first class to say what's right with Israel. The people of Israel inquired of the Lord, who shall go up first for us? Judah shall go up. Does that sound familiar? We didn't probably read it. Chapter 20 and verse 18. Let's see. Chapter 20 and verse 18. The people of Israel arose and went to Bethel and inquired of the God, who shall go up first for us to fight against the people of Benjamin? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up first. It's almost a quote of Judges 1 in verses 1 and 2. Only they're not going out to fight against the people of the land. They're going out to destroy one of their own tribes. This is what Mark said. If only they had devoted this energy to what they should have been doing in the first place. God is the one who gives throughout all of this. In this one, Judah says, hey, Simeon, my brother, come and help me, and then I'll come and help you. In this story, all Israel comes together, and in this occasion, it's not good. They're doing civil war. They are victorious, but their victory is ultimately, everybody loses. Can you really call it a victory if you lose tens of thousands of people and you've destroyed one of your own family? Stacy?
Each time they went up against Benjamin, they got the Lord's direction to do that.
What? I'm sorry.
They
Each
got
time.
the Lord's direction to do that, to go against Benjamin. Each time they asked the Lord if they should do it. But this plan, they hatched on their own. This plan to repopulate Benjamin, that's their own minds coming up with that.
Doesn't there seem to be a lot of that? Look at what they've come up with. I don't know if anybody else is like, if your mind, when you read this story and you look at these lists, I don't know if anybody thinks about 2021 United States of America, but my head goes here an awful lot. Look at what we come up with. This, in chapter 1, Judges 1, 5, and 6, there is Adonai-Bezek, the king that they capture, the enemy, and they dismember him in the start of the book, but they cut his thumbs off. There is dismemberment in this story too, but it's cutting to pieces an innocent victim. And Adonai-Bezek goes to Jerusalem, and this story also is connected to Jerusalem. I think there's supposed to be contrast. There's total obedience in both stories. I think this was Sarah's point in this class. If I remember correctly, Sarah said, look, they did everything they were supposed to do. In this story, they kill everyone and everything, only it's their own people. And you think about the story of Othniel, our ideal judge, family faithfulness. What is the definition of a concubine? She's a sex wife. She has no other purpose other than to be there for that. Othniel is a story about somebody who saw a woman that was treasured and valued and fought for her. This is a story of a Levite who sacrifices his woman and throws her away. It's what Samson taught us how to do with women. You know this story here with Oxa? I think this is probably intentional too. When she rides up in Judges chapter 1, I think it's verse 15, if you want to check it out. It says, she dismounted from her donkey to ask her dad for a piece of land, for more blessing in the promised land. This is a story of a guy who takes the woman that he sacrificed and loads her up on his donkey. I don't know what else to say. Everything's just wrong. I got a lot more I would say, but I think I've probably run my course.
I have a hard time when I read Judges, not just looking at all the facts, and I completely miss what, because the facts don't do me any good, and I have to remind myself, this is written to God's people. It's actually written for me. It's not written for them. And I can read horrible stories like this all day long in the news. This is normal stuff for the world. But it's hard for me to place because I look around and I think, we're not this bad. But it's interesting to think, maybe they would sit around 100 hundreds of years later and think, hey, remember that one time when we almost lost the tribe of Benjamin? And I suppose that's maybe why the little Levite concubine story even made it in. Just to show that even when people have, as it says over and over, everybody's doing what's right in their own eyes. And that starts with me. Even when people are doing that, somebody does something overtly wicked, and we all go, oh, it's terrible, and we band together. And I'm actually reading through Numbers right now, and I was reading a lesson. Sorry, this is too long, but the Hebrew writer has a lot to say about being careful, watch out, and I was just thinking two quick verses. He says in chapter 3:12, see to it, brothers and sisters, that none of you has a sinful, unbelieving heart and turns away from the living God, but encourage each other while it's still today. So anyways, sorry.
No, that's a good comment. That's a great.
One of us falls, we all are going to start.
Yeah, I think that's the great point. This is me talking too long now. It's like when you read the Gulag Archipelago, which is a history of Russia throughout the 1900s, and they killed way more people than Hitler and Germany. And you read that book, and the point of that book is to say every one of us has that in us. You might reject it and say, no, I'm not that evil. Every one of us has that in us, and there's two things about that, and we'll end with Mike's point. This is how Judges ends. We've come this far in verse 25. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. What do we need more than anything else? We need a king who's going to lead us in the way that we should go, which is ultimately going to be a picture of Jesus. And this is how it starts. It starts with no adherence to God's way, to God's plan. Everyone doing what's right in his own eyes. That's my problem. It's a breakdown of marriage and the home, which is what we've seen throughout Judges. A breakdown of male leadership, marriage in the home. There is no leadership at all. Not even the Levites can be trusted to get the job done. This is something worth paying extra close attention to, because I could point out lots of society's problems. This is not one that I might just go to automatically, but in Judges, women are expendable. There are things to be used and discarded. And when you get to a spot in a big picture where women are expendable, that's a marker that we are where Judges 21 is. Israel looks and acts just like the people of the land. That would be a good question for Mike's point. Do we look and act any different from the people around us? Are we different? Or are we the land of Canaan? Homosexuality is rampant in this story, and so is violence. Violence is just wild and out of control. There's only one way to fix it, and that's to turn back to God and to do things God's way. I'll give you the last word. No, the mongrels are out there. We'll stop now. Thank you all for your participation in the study of the book of Judges and your patience with me through it.